A good day to you all our guests. A warm welcome to our final webinar of the 2025 late webinar series. The title of our webinar today is Rapid Corrosion of Hand Pumps. Can we finally address this issue? I think from the title, you can already tell that we've had this issue for a while. And we've known that it has caused, rapid corrosion has caused uh, the premature failure of hand pumps since the 1980s. And yet we know that over 20% of the sub-Saharan Africa relies on hand pumps as their main drinking water supply. But despite us actually knowing that this has been an issue since the 1980s, and the technical solutions that we've had to prevent it and recent efforts to raise awareness, it still remains a challenge in many countries. So in this webinar, we want to show where the problem actually is, to identify the risk factors, and have insights from a number of countries, that's including Zambia and Uganda, and the presence of ongoing research efforts. I'm Fadzai Munodawafa, and I'm going to be the moderator for this webinar. We'll move in to talk about the agenda for the day. And the webinar is going to be divided into 3 sections. And the very first part is the context, where we focus on defining corrosion and assessing the corrosion risks. And here we'll have 3 presentations. The first, that would be the rapid corrosion problem history, presented by Dr. Kirsten Dunnett, who is representing Ask for Water Limited. And next we'll have corrosion and corrosion control in decentralized drinking water systems. And this will be presented by Gail Jenny Florent. And she's from the Rutgers University. And the last presentation in the first part would be assessing corrosion risk for rural water supplies. And this will be done by Dr. Donald John McAllister from the British Geological Survey. The second part would be case studies. And here we're going to focus on 2 countries, the first being Zambia, and we'll have that presentation coming from Javan Kosi, and who is an independent person. And then we'll have the other presentation from Ayabale Ared, who will talk about the experiences of corrosion in Uganda, and he represents WHH World Hunger Hilfe. The final part will focus on the future, where Daniel Hudson will talk about barriers to anti-corrosion policies in sub-Saharan Africa. And we'll have the final presentation from Michael Piepert, who will speak on the role of the World Bank and other development financial institutions. Finally, we'll have a discussion and a closing. And at the end of each part, we'll also have a small section for question and answers. So as I've said, my name is Fadzai Munodawafa Burabura, and I'm a consultant working with Hydrologica. Hydrologica is an organization based in Nicaragua, which owns drilling equipment that has built base of knowledge for over 20 years of drilling experience on professional well drilling. With the experience and additional backing from professionals from the oil and gas industry, Hydrologica imparts the knowledge and experience to governments, drilling companies, and drilling supervisors across the globe through training and consultancy. So let's go right in, and we'll start with the part 1 of our context. So as mentioned, the part 1 will look at rapid corrosion problem and the history, corrosion control in decentralized drinking water systems, and assessing corrosion risk for raw water supplies. So first up, we'll have Dr. Kirsten Dunnett, who represents Ask for Water. And Kirsten is a rural water supply specialist with over 25 years experience, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, and has a background in engineering and diffusion of innovations with subsequent consulting. So over to you, Kirsten, to take us through a clear definition of hand pumps and what rapid hand pump corrosion is. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you, Fadzai. Thank you so much. And thanks for setting the scene. That's fantastic. If we can go to my opening slide, please. So, first of all, what is rapid hand pump corrosion? Most of you here, and 130 so far, so I'm delighted that so many people attending. So, most of you know, but just to kind of think it through, what we're talking about is that hand pump components that should last for 8 to 10 years, they corrode, and they corrode within a few months or a couple of years. And we're talking primarily about the pump rod, which is the piece that moves up and down with a pump handle to pump the well, and the riser pipe, which the water flows up in. And as you can see with the pictures on the right of the slide, you end up with this very red water, particularly in the morning, and components which have been pitted, which are corroded, which are rusted. Now, when does this rapid corrosion happen? Well, basically, it happens when galvanized iron riser pipes or pump rods, when they're installed in aggressive groundwater, then they will corrode, and they'll corrode quickly. And aggressive means low pH, high salts. And what happens with that corrosion is that the kind of protective zinc coating around it starts to get eaten away. And the iron beneath that comes into the water, hence the red water problem. And both Jenny and Donald John are going to talk more about the chemistry and what causes corrosion. They're going to go into that more detail. It's not just galvanized iron pipes and rods that corrode, but materials that have been poorly manufactured can corrode rapidly as well. And low quality stainless steel can corrode rapidly. And it can even happen when water isn't so highly aggressive. So if we go to the next slide, please, thanks. And you put this so well, Fadzai. This problem has been around for a long time. It's a persistent and a pernicious, that's like a big word, a pernicious problem, a problem that just doesn't seem to be going away. And we've had this in Africa and other countries for decades. 1987, the late Shaul Alosarov, working for the World Bank, with the hand pump project of the decades, concluded that this was a widespread and a much more damaging problem than people had thought. That was in 1987. And also in 1987, the late Otto Langenegger, he did some phenomenal work. And he estimated that about two-thirds of the breakdowns in parts of Ghana were because of corrosion. And he reckoned then that about 30% of hand pumps in Niger and southern Ghana were rarely used or they were abandoned due to this high iron. And of course, people end up abandoning those sources. Now, the Berlin Wall came down 2 years later in 1989. And that is me at the Berlin Wall not doing a very good job. It wasn't a very strong hammer, but it was a long time ago. But this is still going on. So the wall's down. We no longer have, this kind of Cold War scenario, other scenarios, but we still have the corrosion problem. If we go to the next slide, please. So where is it a problem? So in my publication from 2022 for Stop the Rot, there was a number of countries, over 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that it was documented that there was rapid corrosion happening or had happened through observations. We just did a survey in 2025. We're still analysing the results, but I've added, unfortunately, even more countries to that slide. So you can see it's widespread. But what makes it difficult is that it may not be everywhere in a country. It may be very few parts of a country, or it may not even be very well understood. And in fact, Ayabali and Javan will talk to you about the stories from both Uganda and Zambia on that. There is things that are still happening. So the World Bank produced a knowledge note in 2024 to try to prevent rapid corrosion. And Michael will talk more about the World Bank and other similar organizations with the corrosion issues. And there's also some really interesting technical innovations going on. And I see that Sandy Pollock and Paul Dawson are online. So they're doing some very interesting work in Uganda around that. So there are things happening for the future. And Michael and Daniel will talk about policy issues around that. So without any further ado, hand pump corrosion has been a problem for at least 2 generations. Let's see what we can talk about today to try to get it solved. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. That was some detail about the history of the corrosion problem, and we see that it really has been around for a while. We're going to move on to our next presentation, which is from Gail Jenny Fleuron, who is a PhD student in environmental science at Rutgers University. Jenny has a master's degree in environmental engineering as well as a bachelor's degree in environmental science. Over to you, Jenny, and take us through your presentation on corrosion control.
Thank you so much, Fateh. Hello, everyone. My name is Gail Jenny Fleuron. I am a first-year PhD student at Rutgers University. I'm working with Dr. Siddhartha Roy. I am really interested in understanding and solving corrosion and corrosion control problems and decentralized water systems. I'm interested in both the infrastructure and the health aspects of it. Next slides, please. Thank you. So I'm gonna start with a simple question. How does metal get into our water? So we obviously have a plumbing that is made of different kind of metals, and it comes in contact with our drinking water that sometimes can be corrosive. And then we ask, are there any type of corrosion control in place to reduce metal release? All of these three factors together contribute to metal release in water. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in order to understand corrosion, it helps to look at different plumbing materials and see how they behave when they come in contact with water. So first we have iron and galvanized steels. These are very common in wells and hand pumps. They corrode by forming rust, which will lead to the red water problems. And then we have copper. Copper corrode very differently. It tends to pit, meaning it forms tiny holes that will grow over time. And it can also release the blue-green soluble copper in our drinking water. Next, we have brass, which is a copper and zinc alloy. There's a picture at the bottom here of a brass tap. Usually it tends to appear safe, but it undergoes dezincification, which is when zinc will selectively dissolve, leaving behind the copper-rich structure that will then corrode as copper. And also brass can have some trace level of lead that can leach into our water, potentially causing health problems. And then we have lead, which itself is one of the most dangerous contaminant in drinking water because it's toxic at very low level. There's no safe level of lead that has been identified in drinking water. So it's really bad and it will cause very dangerous health problems. And even stainless steels can corrode at the right chloride conditions. So all of these materials, they are used in decentralized systems, and it helps to understand how they behave when they come in contact with water. Next, please. So now let's look at some chemical drivers of corrosion. One of the most important one is pH. The lower the pH, the more acidic the water, and the faster metal will dissolve in water. So we want our pH to be relatively high. And then we have alkalinity, which will help in resisting any changes in pH, as we want the pH to stay stable. Alkalinity also will help forming some protective scales on the pipe walls that will prevent metals from releasing into the water. And then we have other variables like disinfectant. The most common one is free chlorine, and free chlorine is a very strong oxidant, and this will it can attack the metals and allow more metals to leach into our water. And then these other variables like temperature, stagnation time, and other ions, they are all very important. So understanding and knowing how to manipulate these variables will help us predict and control corrosion. Next, please. So this brings me to this project that we've been working on. It's a critical review of corrosion and corrosion control problems in decentralized systems. As we know, public utilities have decades of corrosion control research. They have clear treatment guidelines and regulations, but decentralized systems, which serves like hundreds of millions of people, are still under research. So the review that we are developing will synthesize more than 40 years of work on iron, lead, and copper corrosion across different water chemistries. It will compare findings from high-income countries with low and middle-income settings, as their water quality and material selections can be very different. So the goal is to come up with an integrated framework for understanding corrosion control and decentralized systems. So what is known, what works, what doesn't work, and where the major gaps are. So this review will be both a scientific and practical contribution, aiming to be useful to the network and to help in better material selections and more effective corrosion control practices, and ultimately safer and drinking water in all systems. That is all I have. I am very excited to continue this work, and I welcome any questions after the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for the chemistry class. That was very crucial in educating us on the chemistry behind corrosion. We see that there's a critical role that water quality has on corrosion of the pipes and rising mains of hand pump systems. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next presentation, and here we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Donald John McAllister, who is a senior hydrogeologist at the British Geological Survey. He has research interests in rural water supply and more widely in global water resources. So I will hand over to Dr. Donald John McAllister as he looks at the corrosion risks for rural water supply.
Great, thank you, Fatsa, and thank you to the presenters so far. So I'm just going to talk about some work that we've been doing as part of Stop the Rot project to look at predicting the risk of corrosion in hand pump boreholes in sub-Saharan Africa. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, that would be great. Just before I get into that, I just wanted to again highlight the work of Langener in the 80s and the 90s. Where he did a lot of observations and experiments looking at how hand pumps corrode, and identified the pH threshold of 6.5 as a risk factor back 40 years ago. And the plots on the right here are just an example of, as the pH is lower, gets lower, the rate of corrosion increases. And he developed this this risk classification that you can see in the bottom right-hand side. So there's a lot of work done back then, but this pH threshold of 6.5 is still very much widely cited as a key factor for corrosion risk, and most recently has been cited in the World Bank Knowledge Note on corrosion, and they suggest that that it should be built into national regulations. So we really need to understand, how effective is this pH 6.5 threshold as a predictor of corrosion, and are there better predictors? So maybe we could go into the next slide again, please. So as part of the Stop the Rot, we had sort of 3 research questions that we wanted to ask. The first is, are there better predictors of corrosion than pH? What is the probability of corrosion when we have pH less than 6.5 and vice versa above that? And what about a more comprehensive assessment of water quality? Does that help us improve our predictions of corrosion? So can we go into the next slide, please? So what we did was we took the water quality data that we had collected as part of the Hidden Crisis project, which was a very large interdisciplinary project looking at hand pump functionality in Ethiopia, Malawi, and Uganda. And across those 3 countries, we looked at 145 hand pump boreholes. And we looked at various different aspects of functionality, including looking at the aquifer conditions, the condition of the components. We did some social surveys, but what I'm talking about today is really our water chemistry measurements and how they related to our actual observations of corrosion on the components in situ. So again, maybe we could move on to the next slide. So this is just the high level results that we got, and the plot here really shows the pH values across the 145 sites in the 3 countries. It's shown against functionality categories, but I won't go into that in any real detail today. The main thing to point out here is that generally pH is quite low across all 3 countries, and you'll notice in Uganda in particular, almost all of the sites had a pH less than 6.5. So by that standard, in Uganda, almost all sites are at risk of rapid corrosion. And you can see that in various different, in Malawi and Ethiopia, there's a bit more variability, but there's still a significant proportion of sites that have this pH value less than 6.5. But actually, if you then look at going back to the risk table that Langenegger developed, he said that anything below pH 7, there is a risk of corrosion happening. So you can see that in almost all of these sites, we are expecting to see some corrosion. It's just the rate will vary. So maybe we could move on to the next slide, please. So again, just a bit more background results from Ethiopia and Uganda, where we had India Mark II rising mains, and some of the observations that we found. So we found that in Ethiopia, about 60% of rising pipe thicknesses were below the specifications. 55% of galvanizing thickness were below specifications, and almost 50% of the rising mains and rods that we observed were corroded. In Uganda, that was much higher, so 65, 90%, and 80%. So almost 80%, or more than 80% of the pipes and rods we observed in Uganda were greater than were corroded. So yeah, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So we then looked at some of the corrosion indicators that are used quite widely, and we looked at how did those the values of those indicators that we calculated relate to our actual observed corrosion. So there's 4 indicators here: the Langmuir saturation index, which accounts for calcium concentration, alkalinity, temperature, and total dissolved solids, so the salinity level. The Larsen-Scald index, which accounts for sulfate and chloride, and then the riser stability index, which is a kind of variation of the Langmuir index, and then the pH of less than 6.5 threshold. So you can see for the first three, for the Langler, the Larsen-Scold, and the Reisner stability index, at all the sites, when we calculated these indicators, all the sites were in the risk area for corrosion for these indicators. And you can see, for example, the Larsen-Scold indicator, there wasn't really much difference in terms of, our observations of corrosion or not corroded. So these indicators are telling us something, but the main thing they're telling us is that at all these sites, we're at risk of corrosion. But then when we looked at pH 6.5, that threshold, we did see that actually the majority of the sites where we had a pH less than 6.5, we observed corrosion, and where we didn't observe corrosion, in general, they were above that threshold. So it's some evidence for the effectiveness of that threshold as an indicator of corrosion. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So then what we did was we basically built a sort of linear regression model to predict what is the probability of corrosion based on a number of different variables. So we looked at a number of different pH thresholds, including pH less than 6.5. We looked at each of the corrosion indicators that I've just shown you, the Reisner, the Larsen-Scold, etc. And then we also looked at, if we put all of our water chemistry results in, so including chloride, sulfate, salinity, does that improve our predictions? So we had a very large data set of more than 3,000 observations of downhole components from our 145 sites. So we had a good statistical power to be able to do these predictions. And what we found was that pH 6.5 was the most effective indicator, single binary indicator for predicting corrosion. And we found that the probability of corrosion when pH is less than 6.5 is 61% for rising mains, similar for rods. And the corrosion probability when pH is greater than 6.5 was 30%. So while pH is effectively, this pH threshold of 6.5 is an effective indicator, it doesn't mean that when you have a pH above that you're not going to see corrosion occurring. We also then looked at the full model where we put all of our water chemistry results in, and we did see an improvement in our prediction of corrosion, but it was quite a small improvement overall, and it was only a 13% improvement. And actually, one of the main factors out of all of those salinity indicators, all of those water chemistry indicators, was still pH in the models where we had everything in. So this is really good statistical evidence for the effectiveness of pH 6.5 as a predictor of corrosion in rural water supplies. So maybe we could move on to the next slide. So what are the processes that are going on? So why is pH 6.5 such an effective indicator? I'm not going to go into detail on these slides, but there's three main factors. One is when pH is less than 6.5, the higher concentration of H plus ions in solution accelerate the rate of metal dissolution. Then when pH is low, it impedes the protection of layer formation. So when you have very high concentrations of calcium carbonate, for example, in water, you can get a protective layer that forms in the pipes. But when pH is low, that doesn't happen so much, and it slows down that process and also eats up that layer more quickly as well. And then the final thing is that it interacts, the interaction, the synergy with other factors. So while pH is important, high chloride in particular is also very important. So is sulfate and things like temperature and dissolved oxygen as well. But it's the interaction between all these factors and the sort of facilitating role that pH has that is why it's such an effective indicator. So can we just move on to my final slide? So what are the implications of all this? Well, firstly, we've produced strong statistical validation of the empirical measurements that were done by Langenegger. So we've really backed up that work that he did in the 80s and the 90s. We've shown that pH 6.5 is a very effective indicator, but that actually, when your pH is above that, still at least 30% of our observations saw we found corrosion. And then the final sort of main implication of this is the importance of measuring pH accurately in the field, which is not easy. It requires the use of high accuracy probes and proper calibration. It requires waiting for stable measurements before recording pH values. And there's more on that, which will be in our forthcoming hand pump diagnostics manual. There's a range of other implications as well, which are more general around about the importance of replacing components at regular intervals when they're in really pH less than 6.5 waters. The use of more appropriate materials, and there's lots of work being done on that by colleagues in this call today. The adherence to pump standards is crucial. And this work as well, of course, is not unique to hand pumps. Corrosion occurs when metal is in water. So it has implications for solar pumps, which are starting to become more common within the rural water supply sector, and piped water supplies as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Donald John McAllister. To the audience, I hope that you've enjoyed the last two presentations, which have taken us back to the chemistry class. So from your research, what I'm picking up is that pH is the most critical risk factor for corrosion when we're looking at water chemistry. And that as long as we have a pH that is less than 6.5, that has a greater probability of actually having rapid corrosion. And that was very insightful. Thank you very much. And so that brings us to the end of the first segment. And before we move to the second segment, we would want to engage with our guests and have time to just answer a few of the questions that you may be having. We will endeavor to answer all the questions that you have, but in the event that we have time constraints, we'll try as much as we can to consolidate these and then eventually answer them. So our very first question will go to Dr. Kirsten. So the question is that the title and slides talk mostly about hand pump corrosion, but I imagine the problem will also be a problem in motorized pumps. And the person who's asking says, in fact, it will occur in any system where galvanized iron is in touch with acidic groundwater, and that they wanted you to confirm if this is actually correct.
Confirmed. This is absolutely correct. It was the last comment that Donald John made in his presentation, so thanks for preempting that. But absolutely, it's not just a hand pump issue. It can be an issue with all systems. And also Jenny's presentation, also talked about other aspects of decentralized systems, of any systems. So confirmed.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. And our next question is to Dr. DJ. So at what pH does water actually become directly harmful to health?
So when corrosion happens in water, you get leaching of heavy metals, which Jenny's talked a wee bit about as well. So you get things like lead that come into the water. So, I would say that pH less than 6.5 is a good indicator of that threshold. But again, anything metal in water is going to corrode. So, we have to be aware that there is always risk factors when we put these things in. And, Jenny and others in this call are doing a lot of work on the leaching of lead and things like that have implications for human health. But yes, so I think pH 6.5 is a good indicator, but you get leaching happening at other pH values as well.
Thank you, Dr. DJ. We'll have another question for Kirsten. So why is it the use of UPVC pipe is not more widespread versus metal pipe for underground hand pump components? Is it cheaper than metal and not prone to corrosion?
No, thank you very much. That's a great question. And in fact, the AfriDev hand pump which uses PVC was partly a response to that. It was introduced to overcome that issue. What we have though with UPVC is there's a limit to kind of depth limit to how deep it can be installed, 30 meters, 25 meters. There's variation of, what people really feel is the correct depth. What happens with UPVC beyond 30 meters is you have a stretching and you can have a failure of the pipe. So there's a kind of depth issue there. And so when hand pumps are installed to a greater depth, you have to go back to kind of metal materials or PVC with metal couplers. And that's the work, the really interesting, innovative work that's being done by Sandy Pollock and Paul Dawson in Uganda at the moment, looking at other ways of mixing PVC so that it doesn't corrode with stainless steel couplers. And some of the hand pump suppliers from India supplying into Africa also supply alternatives with PVC with stainless steel couplers. So it is there, but there are depth limitations and more work that needs to be done to improve that. Anything else you want to add, Donald John, maybe that I've missed out on that?
No, I don't think so. I think that's right. It's the depth that I think is the major limiting factor. Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten and Donald John. So maybe a question to Jenny, and any one of you can add up to that. Apart from replacing the components of hand pumps, how can we regulate the risk factors to control corrosion?
Thank you for the question. I would say some other way you can control corrosion or like to know how to manipulate the chemistry of it. Like I mentioned before, like you want your pH to be high and you want your high alkalinity. All of these components will help you once you know how to manipulate them, they will help in controlling corrosion.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Due to time, we'll not be able to take all the questions for now. Once we reach the end of the webinar and we still have time, we'll also try and address some of the other questions. So allow me, our guests and presenters, to move on to part 2 of our webinar. And so part 2 is going to be focusing on case studies on corrosion. So first up, I would like to welcome Javan Nkosi, who is a Zambian water professional who has worked in the rural water subsector for more than 25 years on many water supply projects that are funded by the government, NGOs, and donor agencies, as well as, and he's a private consultant across Zambia. Welcome, Javan, and we anticipate to hear of your experience with hand pump corrosion in Zambia.
Let me start by saying good morning, good afternoon, and to others I'll say good evening. Now, I want to talk a bit on the pipe corrosion in Zambia. And one thing I want to underscore right at the beginning is the problem of rapid hand pump corrosion was first addressed in Zambia some 40 years ago. A clear solution was picked up, but this was reversed along the way. Okay, so basically that is the scenario that we have here in Zambia. Now, in this case study, I'll discuss basically the rapid hand pump corrosion under three subsections. I'll talk about the past, then I'll also talk about the present practices, and then I'll also talk about the way forward and challenges. Now, talking about the past, with regard to the past, I'll highlight 3 projects which highlight where we are coming from and what has been, how we have been trying to address the issue of rapid hand pump corrosion. The first one is I will highlight what's called the Central Province Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Project that was undertaken from 1985 to 1996. Now, this project was in Central Province and it covered 5 districts, which includes Chiwombo, Kapiri, Mumbwa, Mkushi, and Serenje. And in this project, 564 boreholes were drilled and equipped with stainless steel pipes and rods. Okay, now the point here is why go for stainless steel pipes? This was a lesson that was picked up from Ghana, where in Ghana they used the Ghana modified India Mark II. This is basically an India Mark II hand pump, but it has a stainless steel rods and riser pipes. And talking about Ghana and Zambia, basically we have the similar problems. According to Peter Harvey, puts very clear that Ghana and Zambia have similar issues with regard to aggressive water. And therefore, to go around that, Ghana standardized the hand pump, where they use only the Ghana modified India Mark II. But with regard to Zambia, during that project, we standardized only in one province. That was in the Central Province. Now, along the way, there was another project in Central Province again. And this was from 2000 to 2007. Unfortunately, or let me put it this way, this project of 2000 to 2007, they drilled 2,920 boreholes India Mark II, equipped with India Mark II. They also rehabilitated 557 India Mark II. Unfortunately, all these India Mark II they used the galvanized iron pipes. So basically, the gain that was done from 1985 to 1996 was reversed by this 2000 to 2007 project, where more than 3,000 projects, basically we're saying even some of those stainless steel pipes were all pulled out and replaced by JI pipes. What's the end? All Central Province became rusty again, and people abandoned the project, the hand pumps. The other project I want to talk about is the Rural Water Supply project in Northwestern Province. This covered 3 districts, Kasempa, Mufumbwe, and Kabompo. In this project, 359 boreholes were drilled, and these were equipped with India Mark II hand pumps. Fortunately, like the earlier Central Province project, this one, the India Mark II had 304, what's called 304 grade stainless steel riser pipes and rods, and these were used to prevent corrosion. So basically, this was another gain. Next slide. The third project which I want to talk about is the groundwater development in Luapula Province. This was from 2007 to 2016. This was under the support from JICA. This was done under 3 different phases, and a total of 567 AfriDev pumps with PVC riser pipes. And these were basically, which were able to be used without being corroded, because they are using UPVC riser pipes. In some cases, they're also equipped with stainless steel riser pipes due to the low water tables. During this project also, they did what's called the pipe replacement study. And where in this, they picked up 20 sites in 11 districts, as you can see in the map of Zambia shown. And of these, they're able to come up with, in acidic water, that's what the recommendation, in acidic water, which is basically aggressive water, with different dynamic water levels, you can either use AfriDev or India Mark II with stainless steel riser pipes. So basically, the JICA project addressed the issue of hand pump corrosion in that regard. Either use AfriDev or India Mark II stainless steel riser pipes. Next slide. Now, in this slide, basically, I'm now talking about some of the present efforts for systematic change, where we go towards either stainless steel or UPVC pipes. The first example I want to highlight is the work of World Vision. World Vision, I mean, they've done some work here in Zambia since 2010. That's where there was a bit more emphasis with regard to rural water. I mean, with regard to World Vision, World Vision have been using stainless steel riser pipes on the India Mark II since 1993. This will pick up from their history. And World Vision started work here in Zambia in 1981. And so far, World Vision has drilled and rehabilitated more than 8,500 hand pumps. All these, they use stainless steel riser pipes. So meaning all these other years in the past, with regard to World Vision, with them is only stainless steel all along. The second example I want to highlight is UNICEF from 2020 to 2022. With regard to UNICEF, they also have gone in to do only either new boreholes or rehabs. All of them use stainless steel riser pipes. The third one is the scaling up nutrition, the technical assistance, which is called SAN-TA project from 2020 to 2021 and 2021 to 2023. Here with SAN-TA, they did 273 using only UPVC riser pipes and 237, which are basically stainless steel riser pipes. And then we've also empowered communities helping others, ECHO. From 2020 to 2023, ECHO has done 1,345 UPVC riser pipes and stainless steel. This work has been done in Central Province and also in Western Province. In 2017, UNICEF did what's called a replacement study in Milenge and Mansa. And one thing that comes out very clear is a village called Ngoi village in Milenge district in 2016. One remarked very clearly that this was a remarkable turnaround from undrinkable water to potable water. The only difference, the basic difference is because there was a replacement of taking out the GI pipes and replacing it with either stainless steel or GI pipe. Either stainless steel or UPVC pipe. There was quite a remarkable change that people were able, the boreholes that had abandoned, they quickly went back to use those boreholes because of the change of the material of the riser pipes. So that is why it's so key. Looking at the other studies that have been done and also the report that have been shared, that this is what we're not supposed to be that's supposed to be our way of direction. What's the challenge and outstanding? Unfortunately, the major challenge is India Mark II equipped with galvanized iron pipes are still being used on some of the projects, which is the unfortunate part. And because of that, we are saying we continue imploring on our government that to enact a law to stop the use of galvanized iron pipes in aggressive water. Aggressive water in Zambia constitutes more than 88% of our groundwater. This is all found in what's called the second and the third agroecological zones, which takes care of almost like the southern part of, say, southern part of Western, Southern province and parts of Eastern province, that's region 1. But above that, going all the way up north, those regions are I mean, the groundwater is quite aggressive. So 88% of our groundwater in Zambia is too aggressive. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shaban. There was a lot there in terms of your experience in Zambia, and we see that there has been some progress in the work in terms of anti-corrosion. So moving on, we're going to move on to Ayebale Ared, who is going to talk to us about rapid hand corrosion in Uganda. So Ayebale Ared works with the World Hunger Hilfe, and he's an expert in borehole drilling, rehabilitation, and piped water systems. So over to you, Ayebale, and talk us through your experience in Uganda.
Thank you very much. Like the presenter said, my name is Ayebale Ared. I work for WHH Uganda. And I'm very happy to take all of us through what we are doing in Uganda to address the problem of corrosion, which has been a decades-long crisis in rural water infrastructure. Looking at the slide that is on the screens, you realize that the core problem in the 1990s and 2000s that we have faced in Uganda was the widespread of hand pump failure through the years of 1990s and 2000s. And this wasn't a minor equipment fatigue, but it was a systematic crisis that compromised the water access for millions of people in the country. Looking at the 2016 directive, I have to appreciate the role of the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, where a directive was issued nationwide, suspending the use of galvanized iron for all new boreholes and rehabilitated boreholes. And this made Uganda to become one of the first pioneers in banning galvanized iron pipes to combat corrosion. Next slide. Yeah, looking at the present and standardizing, first of all, we appreciate from the previous presenters that some of the causes of corrosion, the key culprit is indiscriminate use of galvanized iron, riser pipes. Crucially, they were used irrespective of the local groundwater chemistry in areas with aggressive water, where these pipes quickly failed. And the results were very devastating, with high non-functionality rates and contamination of water, where we have a lot of red water coming out of bores in the mornings. Moving forward, this directive was followed up with a new national protocols where the Ministry of Water and Environment now promotes corrosion-resistant alternatives, setting stainless steel grades, especially 304 and 316, and UPVC for the to be the standard materials used in these projects. And the key change is mandated by the National Borehole Drilling Specifications in 2018-2021, where water quality analysis is mandatory before material selection. So, however, we are having all this going on, we must be vigilant because full compliance requires strict enforcement, and some actors opt for cheaper raw stainless steel grades like 302 or 202, 201 due to the cost pressures. That's where our role now has to be a little bit more critical. And this is where, as WHH, as an organization, we are coming in. Next slide. Yes, as WHH, we had to operationalize the Ministry of Water and Environment policies by making the site chemistry or the water quality testing for ambient conditions at the site the deciding factor for installation materials. What happens is that the drilling supervisors at the site during pump testing have to make sure they move with pH and EC meters. And then as they are pumping testing, we measure the water quality in terms of electrical conductivity and pH. We do this because we don't want to have compromises of transportation. A few chemicals may change the quality. So we want to get the real ambient conditions of the aquifers. So that's why we prioritize having some mobile test kits at the site. So here what happens that when we test the EC and the pH at site is where we recommend which materials to install, especially when we have aggressive water where our pH is less than 6.5 and electrical conductivity is greater than 500, we strictly go for stainless steel riser rods and risers and rods. And always recommend for 304/316 stainless steel grade. For moderate or less aggressive water, where the pH is greater than 5 and the EC is less than 500, we recommend UPVC with stainless steel cupolas and of course stainless steel rods. However, before researchers came in, we have been limited that at some point with less aggressive water, we install stainless steel because the PVC that was on the market couldn't handle beyond 30 meters of depth, where we could have issues where the threads of PVC jump out of the cupolas of stainless steel, maybe due to less tensile strength. So, but I believe with the new technologies coming up and researches on improving how UPVC should go beyond that, we should be looking into that. The takeaway here is that data-driven selection prevents hypercorrosion, and Uganda offers really a vital lesson for all our country programs. The durability of our wash interventions relies on scientific suitability. We cannot afford to make materials decision without water chemistry data actually at the site. So our internal call to action is that we prioritize data before installation, during rehabilitations, and during drilling before installing these materials. We also should be champions for compliance and do not allow the cheaper substandard materials to enter the projects, because we'll be risking the life of borrowers and life of the beneficiaries. But also to share learnings to the broader group, the universe, so that everybody knows that the scientific site-specific approach really works well and the results are better. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Ayebale. Here we see the role of the government in curbing corrosion and also what WHH is also doing at organizational level. And this shows that we can actually do what we can where we are. So thank you so much for that. We're going to open up for a few minutes for questions to our two presenters, Ayebale and Javan. So I'll start with Javan. So a question to you is that thanks for your presentation. And the person then says, I find it hard to understand that people or organizations or companies still are installing galvanized iron in aggressive groundwater. Why is this not a major scandal?
My response to that is either we don't read our own history or we close our eyes and ears to be taught by history. For example, the first project I talked about, the Central Province Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Project of Central Province from 1985 to 1996. There we did a number of boreholes, and yet in 2000, is it the other one, which was the Central Province, which also did another 3,000 boreholes using galvanized iron pipes. The question is, did the funders not know what the problems are? Or did the people in the ministry not know what was happening? So basically, it's more to do with our own history, not wanting to learn what has been going on. But what interestingly also, people from the ministry move from workshop to workshop, to international conference to another international conference, and these things are discussed. But once they get back home, they sit back and do as though nothing has been taught. So basically, it's our own, own created problem. One of the issues that is going to come up is the issue of cost. Ghana, when they changed, it was not a small cost, it was a major cost. The international community came alongside them to help them to change from GI to stainless steel pipes. The Zambian situation, it was only in one province, but thereafter, either they left us on all by ourselves, and with our little economy, with our little funds that we have, we can only go so far as GI. We could not go as far as stainless steel. So maybe to an extent, it could be our own problem, but also the donor community, the international community has basically like abandoned us to ourselves to see how we can how can we fend for ourselves. That problem,
Thank you.
I don't want to call it a scandal right away.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Javan. So what I'm getting from you is that we need to learn from our own mistakes or from the data that we are getting. So we'll have a question for Ayebale, and the person says it is great to see the adoption of stainless steel as a standard in Uganda. What can other countries learn from this experience and implement in their own operations?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really a great question. One is that looking at the history of the functionality of boreholes that are installed with galvanized iron and the rapid corrosion that happens, you have reduced non-functionality when you install stainless steel hand pump parts. Another thing is that in case the governments in other countries haven't put a ban on galvanized iron, for example, for boreholes, organizations or partners involved can do this by themselves by borrowing a leaf on determining the site chemistry before installing these materials so that they are able to address the corrosion issue. The whole issue that we are trying to address here is rapid hand pump corrosion and the time, how many times a bore breaks in a year and is attributed to material failure related to corrosion. So when we relate as a country, we relate the previous times or the boards that we have worked on that have been installed with previously, we realize that there is a huge difference in terms of functionality when you install stainless steel, the right grades as the chemistry of the water dictates. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll need to quickly move on to the very final segment of our presentations. So the final segment is going to be part 3, where we focus on the future, where we are looking ahead. And so for our very first presentation, I'd like to welcome Daniel Hudson, who is a master's student at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. Welcome, Daniel, and over to you.
Good afternoon. So we've talked about some of the tools to fight rapid hand pump corrosion, and a few of the other presenters have touched on policy as one of those tools. I have focused on sub-Saharan Africa because of the large reliance on hand pumps. Every country is different, and while some countries have regulated, such as Uganda, others have not. Today, I will be sharing some selected results from the RWSN hand pump corrosion survey that Kirsten mentioned earlier, and some key data points from my research. I'm going to go through my slides somewhat quickly to allow for greater question time later. Please see the recording for my slides or send me an email if you would like more information. Next, here we go. On the right, you will notice, can we go back? On the right, you will notice that under 20% of countries have any sort of regulation or even recommendations around hand pump corrosion policy. There is a correlation between the countries lacking regulation and those reporting corrosion problems, but that could be due to respondents who know more about corrosion, knowing more about policy as well. The key takeaway is that most countries rely on general water quality standards to govern hand pumps, and I will show you in a minute why general quality standards are insufficient. Next, please. NGOs are responding more strongly to the threat of rapid hand pump corrosion, and my research has not yet uncovered exactly why, but it may be due in part to the difficulty of enacting law in contrast to changing organizational policies. In addition, governments tend to want a lot more data before they enact big policy change. Next, please. I spoke with Albert earlier this year. He's an NGO staffer working in rural South Sudan. He told me that of the 200 repairs he and his colleagues have conducted since 2023, every single repair except for one involved replacing pipes, rods, or both. These are the components which should last the longest, but his team is spending the most of their time replacing these pipes instead of conducting other repairs. He told me that one of their biggest challenges is cheap, low-quality corrosion parts flooding the market. The free market is not able to address this problem, and regulation of some sort is the only way to make rapid hand pump corrosion a problem of the past. Next, please. So, why have countries and organizations not drafted regulations or policies? I have selected some of the barriers, which you can see here. I guess many of these I'm sure will not surprise you. Next, one of the biggest problems, however, is that we just don't know which breakdowns are due to corrosion. Next, please. Corrosion is hiding behind much more visible problems. It was only cited as the 5th most significant factor for hand pump longevity, which indicates that it's often not seen as a large problem. But from the example above, you can see how a report on 200 pipe replacements says nothing about why those pipes need to be replaced. Next, please. Myself and various individuals are trying to bring corrosion data to government staff, which require a lot more data to change policy. If you do have any hand pump repair data, which you can share, please reach out to me. There's a team in Uganda piloting a new type of corrosion-resistant PVC that can operate down to 60 meters with PVC risers, to a team in Nigeria which piloted a data gathering project to track pump breakdown causes. Michael Tibert with the World Bank is now going to be sharing some solutions on monetary tools which can be brought to bear to solve rapid hand pump corrosion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Indeed, policy does matter. This aspect then brings us to financing the policies. So quickly, we'll move on to Michael Thibert, who is a senior water specialist at the World Bank with over 17 years of experience in rural and urban WASH, project management, and other related fields in Africa. Welcome, Michael. Please take the floor.
Many thanks, Fadzai. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So you can go ahead and go to the slide. So as you can see, I would break down the work that the World Bank and other development finance institutions can do to address rapid corrosion into four principal roles. The first role that we can play is in dissemination and trainings that foster an improved understanding of the challenge of rapid corrosion, its economic and financial implications, and potential solutions. The first step of this process, of course, was the Stop the Rot Water Knowledge Note prepared in collaboration with the Rural Water Supply Network. But moving forward, we would like to ensure that our global sector specialists are capacitated to engage with government teams and service providers wherever we work on rural water to ensure that they properly address rapid corrosion risks during project preparation and implementation activities. Also, we will work to ensure that corrosion prevention is integrated in future toolkits and workshops targeting rural water sustainability in general, so that it is systematically a part of a holistic solution to the sector's challenges. Throughout engagement, it is important to tailor the message to the given audience. So we want to first ensure that governments and service providers properly appreciate the magnitude of the challenge, the adverse implications of galvanized iron and poor quality materials on the sustainability of rural water services and the well-being of population through increased downtime, deteriorated water quality, and systems failure, all of which drive the population to revert to unimproved water services with all the disruptive health consequences that entails. But it's also important for governments to consider, and particularly when we're talking about the ministries of finance, to understand the implication of increased life cycle costs. A small increase in upfront investment can generate substantial cost savings over time. Our second role, and the one that many of you may be most familiar with, is in direct infrastructure investment, wherein we can work with our clients to ensure that terms of references and bidding documents for the construction and rehabilitation of rural water infrastructure explicitly fit for purpose materials and design in consideration of rapid corrosion potential. But another avenue that the World Bank can help address is through fostering in-country availability of alternative materials. This can be done by supporting our clients in conducting early market engagement to improve their understanding of the market, existing bottlenecks to supply, help them identify and manage risks, and most importantly, inform and motivate qualified and capable suppliers to invest in the supply of these materials. The third role that we can play, particularly critical for broader sector level change that goes beyond our direct investments, is supporting policy and regulatory reform, as Daniel was just elaborating. And the first step that we can play is in financing the critical analytical work that informs the establishment and operationalization of critical reforms, including the required studies, stakeholder engagement activities, legal documents, and institutional startup costs. This could include regulatory impact assessments to better understand life cycle cost implications of increased regulation, reviews of national standards and technical specifications, assessments on monitoring and enforcement mechanisms that lean on global best practices, etc. Critically, the World Bank and other development finance institutions can also leverage results-based instruments to directly incentivize the government to implement critical reforms. The idea here is that we condition disbursements, generally a much larger amount of financing than is actually required to implement a reform, on the achievement of verifiable results. This could incentivize, for example, the adoption of regulations, the development of material certification procedures, and or operationalizing enforcement mechanisms towards banning galvanized iron in low pH environments. Finally, the World Bank can contribute to the critical role of data collection and knowledge exchange that all of us engaged in the sector should be supporting. At a national level, we can finance the mapping of aquifer properties that trigger rapid hand pump corrosion to inform effective decision making. In particular, this involves mapping regions with particularly low pH and ensuring that pH and other relevant parameters are included in periodic water quality monitoring. To advance our collective knowledge base, we can ensure that our development projects collect data on the performance and sustainability of rural water systems to build a base of data demonstrating impact of design and management choices. And finally, given our global reach, we can seek opportunities to foster peer-to-peer learning to promote best practices on corrosion prevention. With that, I thank you all for your attention and look forward to the Q&A session. Over to you, Fadzai.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the 4 buckets that support policy improvements for addressing rapid corrosion by the World Bank and the DFIs. So we'll move on to the questions. I'll start with Daniel. So Daniel, for you, in a country like Chad with no formal corrosion policy, where do we even begin? Should our first national goal be simply map and standardize which regions have the most aggressive groundwater and which hand pump models are failing the faster?
That's a really good question, and Michael can potentially also speak on this. The World Bank published a knowledge note which provides a framework that governments can use to implement policy, whether that be regional or national. In a country like Uganda, where almost all of the groundwater is acidic and corrosive, it may make sense to do a whole national policy, just say, hey, we need to not use galvanized iron anywhere. I don't know your specific situation in Chad. If it is regional, then perhaps you do need to do a regional policy. But if it's national, a national policy makes sense. So I refer to the World Bank knowledge note on the RWSN website.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that. And to Michael, can you tell us more about the knowledge note? Has the note been taken up or adopted in certain countries?
So I think we're still at a bit of an early stage in terms of the dissemination process. It's something that we are making sure that we push out through our task teams as they engage with their government counterparts to make sure that rapid corrosion is properly addressed. But I'm not sure at this point if I can cite any specific examples.
Okay, thank you so much. We know that there are so many questions that have been posted by our guests, and I would really want you to check on the responses as our presenters were responding to the questions as we go. But in the event that your question has not yet been answered, we will try our best to consolidate these and then be able to share back the responses. So for now, I'm going to call upon Kristen to have, if she has any thought-provoking to say.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Fadzai. I'm not going to try to summarize because you've all heard everything already. I'm going to ask a question to everyone attending the webinar and also all of us on the, who've been presenting. So my question is, what is your individual professional call to action to eliminate rapid hand pump corrosion? And please just put that in the chat, yours. So not what they should do, what he should do, what she should do, what I should do, but what your own call to action is. And let's just have a little look at what comes up there in the chat. So we could have done this as a poll question. I'm sorry, RWSN team, for not doing that, but I was kind of keen to see how the webinar went. And maybe, Fadzai, we can go around everybody here and kind of reflect what is what is our call to action while people are writing in the chat. So maybe Batima, you can help me by kind of putting the question in the chat, because it was very kind of high speed. What's your call to action to eliminate rapid hand pump corrosion? And yeah, Fadza, you're the chair, so I'll hand back to you to see who you want to pick first.
Okay. I think let's start with Jenny. Please take us through what would be your call to
Yes, thank you so much. I think my call for action is what I would do, what I'm doing now, is trying to understand coercion more and coercion control, knowing what are the best way to control coercion, and especially in decentralized system where money might be problems, and so like trying to see like what are the best way to control coercion. That's kind of what my project is about, is learning what's out there, what we need to know, and what we need to work towards.
Thank you so much. So we'll have the next person, and I'll just give you just 30 seconds to respond. So Ayabale, what would be your call to action with your experience in Uganda? What would be your call to action?
Thank you very much. My call to action still is that the governments in respective countries should really look into how to push the use of the right for materials, especially stainless steel and PVC. But most importantly, before we run to the actors, the partners, we need to prioritize site chemistry. We need to understand the ambient conditions of water that we are doing, because it may all start with us. By the time we do the right thing, then it will be easy for the governments to know and have a baseline on regulating the quality of the materials. So to the actors, technical people around, we prioritize the chemistry of the water, and then we decide the material grades that are needed depending on what quality of the water is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayabale. To you, Daniel, you have a policy view. So what would be your call to action?
My call to action would be to share data with as many people as possible. The more data is available, the more governments will be able to see how much of a problem this is and actually act on that.
Okay. Javan, from your experience in Zambia and the knowledge that you have in Ghana, what is your call to action?
One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is one project that I noticed where people didn't have water, and the project came in and gave them hand pumps, and everyone was very happy. And the contractor and the government worked out. Down the road, maybe 6 months down the road, people could not go back and drink that same water. I mean, they feel almost like cheated. I mean, the technical people who are supposed to be sensitive and know what needs to be done, it's like they looked elsewhere and the community were left without good water. So my call to action is the issue of bringing morals. When we bring water, is it the water that will be happy for us ourselves to drink from? Otherwise, if it's business as usual, we're not being helpful. and we're not being morally upright to answer the call of, we are trying to help people because of this problem with water, and yet what we're giving them is not the good water that we have in mind. Many a time we go in and to go and inspect these water projects, but in our back pocket, we have mineral water which we have carried from town because we're too good to drink that village water. Maybe we need to change our attitude towards the people who we are serving in the rural communities. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Javan. And I'll call upon Michael. You have supported many of these aspects into as we look at Stop the Rot. So for you, what would be your call to action?
My call to action is now to make sure that rapid corrosion prevention is really integrated systematically into all of our work in terms of rural water sustainability. I think in terms of development professionals, sector specialists, we have a lot of things in mind that we want to make sure are considered during project preparation, implementation, or general sector support. And if we have just kind of standalone aspects, it can get lost, but we need to make sure that this is a fundamental issue that is addressed from the beginning as part of a comprehensive package that we can bring to our clients to make sure that that these services are sustainable. They provide the quality services as Javan was expressing.
Thank you so much. And finally, to you, Kristen, you have been involved in the Stop the Rot, and you've had so much experience with rural water supply. So for you, what is the call to action? And from there, you can then take up some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Fadzai. So my call to action is building on Michael's last point of systemic change. That's great, really great to hear from the bank. But remember, the bank is one development funding agency, and there are many others. So my call to action is around this community, and how to bring champions together who are trying, who are striving and keeping on learning and inspiring each other. And that's something I can do. So, it's whether it's through closed webinars or some online discussions, I'm not sure. But to really, because that map and that fact that we got more countries on the map with the survey that Daniel and I put out is grim. So community building to cross fertilization learning to get rid of this problem. So it's not another 50 years down the line when I won't be able to knock any more walls down like I did in 1989. Back to you, Fadzai. Oh, I think maybe Fadzai's gone off line. Looks like our connection's dropped. So just to say to everybody, thank you so much for enjoying this webinar. It was packed. We had an awful lot to share. Many presenters. Keep sharing. Join the RWSN discussion groups that Sean posted in the chat, and all the recordings for this webinar and all the previous webinars will be available online. So you can see the kind of overview of what's happened in this series. This is the end of the late 2025 series. And let's keep interacting and changing and improving. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and our great team here. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.